I thought the
All right.
cloud was infinite.
It's not infinite. Those clouds, they disappear. Welcome to this virtual coffee edition of the Lunch and Learn sessions. Our mission is to be a welcoming tech community that has room for growth and mentorship at all levels and creates meaningful opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. I got it. To find our code of conduct, events, and more, check out our site at virtualcoffee.io. We are very excited to be here today to be talking about this Lunch and Learn. This is our first one that we've had in a while, and we are going to be talking about coding questions, problem solving, navigating technical challenges. And so today with me, I have Nick Taylor. I am Bekah. I am one of the creator and maintainers of Virtual Coffee and a technical community builder at DeepGram. And I am very excited to be doing this session with Nick. I'll let him do his intro as well.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm a Virtual Coffee longtime member too, from not literally the beginning. I think maybe the second or third Virtual Coffee is when I started, because I had a work commitment at the time, so I had to reschedule the first one. But yeah, aside from that, I do other things at Virtual Coffee. I lead rooms sometimes, as well as take notes, all that stuff. In my day job, though, I'm a staff engineer at Netlify, working on the ecosystem team. Started working there a couple months ago. Been pretty stoked working there. So, and just happy to be here as well. Yeah, and I guess we'll just get started. I'm gonna drop a few links in the chat. We can share them on the YouTube once it's recorded, but excuse me, there's a resource from the Virtual Coffee site for asking coding questions. And I'm also going to drop, I did a mini Dev 2 series on just a couple things that we're going to be talking about today. Part of that's navigating a new code base, and also kind of like what tools do you use to ask questions or dig into, finding out as much as you can about something before you do go about asking a question. So you can check those two resources out. And yeah, I guess we'll just get started, Bekah.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start. I also want to a big shout out to David Alpert. He is going to be on our next season of the Virtual Coffee podcast. And he also talks a lot about navigating these coding challenges, pairing with other people. So that will be a very excellent resource that once it's available, we will add to our section on the site and on the YouTube channel.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And like Bekah said, feel free to don't interrupt, but like raise your hand or whatever, and feel free to ask questions as we go along. It's kind of really an open-ended conversation. We definitely have points we're going to bring up, but we'd love to hear from anybody, regardless of your skill level or experience, because people approach problems differently. And honestly, even sometimes as a beginner mindset, you can have insight into something that somebody more senior might overlook. So it's super important, and do not be afraid to raise your hand and ask a question or provide feedback. I'm sure it's going to be super useful. Cool. All right. Yeah, I guess, did you want to start it, Bekah, or do you want me to?
Sure. No, I'll go ahead. So I'll say, like, I've been in tech for a couple of years now. I'm a career transitioner, but one of the biggest challenges I faced coming into tech, I was on a self-paced boot camp track. So I didn't have a lot of interaction with other folks. And so I was navigating things on my own, trying to find answers by myself. So I didn't have the opportunity to ask a lot of questions. And when I moved into my first job, that was a real challenge for me, because I didn't know, like, what questions should I ask? How should I be asking these questions? And to be honest, I wasted a lot of time not trying to ask those questions because I felt silly asking them. So I want to say that asking questions is a key tool that you have in your toolbox. When you ask questions, you will learn faster. Now, that doesn't mean that you should just ask a question immediately. That means that there's some prep work that you should do building up to that, because you have to be able to provide a good question. And that link that Nick threw in there, the coding questions guide, that's a really good start to help you to frame what your questions look like. I'll also post a link to a Slack question that Julia asked a couple of days ago that I thought did a really nice job of breaking down the problem. But there are for sure some things that you can do before asking a question. And Nick, maybe you and I can kind of switch off with some of these things, but Google is your friend. We'll start there.
Yeah.
Definitely Google the thing and know how you Googled it, what that topic is, and be able to share that with someone else. Like, what are the keywords that you're looking for? You're not always going to have the vocabulary to describe those things, but what you can do is try your best and get those keywords in there.
Yeah, for sure. And, some of this information might sound obvious that we're saying, but a lot of people don't do these things sometimes. So that's why we're also explicitly saying some of these things. And, Googling is something that is super valuable these days. Like when I started off, there was no real sense of mentorship. Stack Overflow did not exist when I started programming. So like it was literally reading books, figuring things out, maybe talking to some coworkers. The landscape is a lot different now. But in terms of the Googling, for example, like and this is not something that, somebody starting off does. People of all levels Google all the time. I Google stuff every day. And a perfect example is, I don't know, I'm doing I primarily do web development, but like, so I'll do something and all of a sudden I get an error. And like, if I know what the error is, I can dig in a bit. But if I'm like, never seen that before, or why is it giving me that error? I'm going to literally go and copy that error that I am getting, and I'm going to paste that into Google. Usually though, the thing I've seen people do sometimes is they'll literally paste in the entire thing, and that doesn't work sometimes because, for example, say you're working on your computer, it's going to say like, if you're on a Mac or PC, whatever, it's going to say /user/Nikki T online or something, and then like some path which won't show up in a search result. But if you get rid of that stuff, and then you get the error, mainly just the message, or like you kind of tweak it until it's pretty generalized, you will get results. And I guarantee you at least one person on the planet has had this error happen to them. There are odd times where I've Googled things and I'll get like an obscure Chinese or Russian website. I don't know why it's always a Chinese or Russian
Yeah,
website,
it
but
is.
they just end up being, yeah. And the error will be in there, and like, you can try Google Translate, or you can maybe decipher some things if there's a code snippet, but there's almost always somebody who's run into this issue. So, literally looking for those things. And getting back to Becca's point, it's 100% okay to ask questions all the time. It's just do a bit of digging first. And I know it'll vary depending on your experience. You might not be able to investigate as much because you might not know as much about somebody who's been doing it longer, but it's a lot better doing that than just going up to somebody and saying, yeah, it doesn't work, or like the page blew up, because it's not that they don't want to help you. It's just, it's not helpful. And it just means you're kind of offloading everything to the other person. So it's kind of partially a respectful thing, but also just do as much due diligence as you are able to. And it'll be appreciated when somebody does help you out.
Yeah, and I think that along with that, one of the primary things that we have as developers that we need to do is we're investigators, right? Like it's detective work that we have to do. So if you are new to coding and you're just asking, hey, I have to use Express. Does anybody have to use this? But you haven't looked at any of the documentation, you haven't dug into it, you haven't tried to apply it, then you are putting pressure on other people to do the work for you. You have to learn how to do the work, because that's how you will progress as a developer. And that's why asking good questions is important rather than asking all of the questions. I think
Yeah.
that, go ahead, Nick.
No, I just made weird noises. Sorry.
Your noises are excellent. One of the things that I didn't ever learn at boot camp that I learned when I was working my first job was to check GitHub issues and discussions. That wasn't anything that was put on my radar. And I remember the first time I was asked it, like, did you check that? I'm like, what? Like, it wasn't in my toolbox. And I have found since then that many of the problems that I have had, I can trace to GitHub discussions for a particular package or a framework that I'm using and see like, oh, okay, number one, I'm not the only one who's facing this challenge. But number two, somebody has suggested a workaround or an answer. And I remember the last time I probably applied it, I think I was writing a Cypress test and I needed to have a custom Cypress command in order to get the test working in the way that I wanted to. And then I legit just copied and pasted the code from that issue into my file and updated it with like my version of things. And then I was able to go on my way and have it working. So putting that in your toolbox is incredibly important too.
Yeah, no, for sure. And we were mentioning, Becca was saying like we're detectives, and it really is true. Like whether you're fixing a bug or looking into a feature or investigating some kind of problem, yes, you do need technical skills at the end of the day, but a lot of it is it's problem solving, and like so for example, I've seen this happen a lot. Somebody will be like, I've got this error and this is happening, and like, and this will happen especially for open source projects. They'll ask you, can you please provide us with a reproduction of the issue? And I've seen a lot of times where people are like, oh, well, I can't, it's company code, I can't share it. So, which doesn't help either party. So like what's kind of good is like if you can dig down to like, okay, yeah, I know I can't include like our our enterprise login and everything, but the problem is the page crashes when this is happening. So if I can just create a mini app where I can show the exact error, it just helps isolate things. It gets rid of a lot of the noise. So and that's part of kind of digging into the problem as well, because you're like, okay, I need to just make this piece reproducible. So how can I pull it out? And honestly, there's other things that might, it's not so much to do with solving the problems here, but as you dig into this code, you might be like, oh, maybe this could be broken up better in the future. Like you might start discovering stuff about your code too. It's just a little side note. But it really is problem solving. And I'm also mentioning this too because there's a lot of career changers I know in virtual coffee. And it doesn't matter if you don't have technical experience. Yes, you do need some eventually, obviously, to do the job, but it's really about being able to break down the problems. Like I know Becca is a teacher. There's other people. I think somebody who's a journalist. These are all skills that require you to break down things or dig into things. So I just want to give a shout out to career transitioners that it's not all doom and gloom, and definitely play it. I know I'm going on a tangent here, but definitely lean on the skills you have. They're not useless. Okay. Sorry, I'll get off my mini soapbox there.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
want to read out what David Alpert put in the chat. How to reproduce an issue is sometimes shortened to replication steps or just rep steps. And that's a really good tip there, and something that you might want to ask if you're on a team. What is the terminology that we use for this? Or I know on our virtual coffee repo, if you file an issue or a bug report, there's steps. It's a form that asks you a bunch of different questions, right? Sometimes you don't need all of those questions, but it's to help us narrow down where is the problem and how can we get to this more quickly and efficiently. So not only will it help you to solve the problem, but if there's somebody else who is going to be supporting you, it's going to help them find the issue as well.
Yeah. And I like that you brought up terminology because I'll be honest, there's been many times in my career, I'm like, I have no idea what that acronym means. And when I was younger, like uh, ROI, which is a businessy term, which means return on investment, I didn't know what that meant for the longest time. And I would never say anything. I'd just do the nod and look cool, like I know what's going on, And then after a while, I was just like, yeah, exactly. I nodded exactly like Kirk did, like smooth and like, yes, Roy. We need Roy. A couple of things that reminded me, Vic, I do this as well, but Vic from Virtual Coffee mentioned this on Twitter at one point. If you're like a more senior person, like in a meeting or whatever, and like acronyms come out or terminology, just say, like, okay, ROI, so return on investment, and that way you're just putting it out there, and it removes that burden of somebody else saying, well, what does that mean? I know some companies have glossaries and stuff. You could provide that as well, um, but it just goes to show, and I'm being hypocritical because when I was younger, I did not ask questions all the time, but it's better to ask the questions now than like 2 months down the road. So like there really is no silly or stupid questions. And I still say that too when I ask a question sometimes. This might be a silly question, but it's not a silly question. Just ask it. And it's silly if you don't ask it, because 2 months down the road when everybody else knows what's going on and you're just like, yeah, that thing there. Yep. Sounds good. Sounds good. So yeah, definitely do not hesitate to ask questions. But just getting back to do your due diligence as best as you can before asking some of these questions is all.
Yeah. And I think along with that, as we're talking about like breaking down the problem, sometimes it helps to write down what that looks like, to actually create that mental model and write it out, because sometimes you're thinking so quickly in your head that you think you have it, but you've missed steps. So documenting what you're doing on paper and pencil, or using a tool like Excalibur, can help you to see where the connections are or what you're missing. And I know that for sure that's helped me to navigate like more complicated code bases where there's a lot of different things happening, and saying, okay, well, this piece connects to this one, and that's where it's getting this data from. And then it sends that data over to this one. And then I'm like, wait a minute, where does this other data come from? It is not accounted for. So I have to go back and find that. And so tracing that out, or creating a physical mental model using a whiteboard, if you have one, can be really useful to for yourself, first of all, but also to share with somebody else if they're going to come in and help you with the question that you have.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I know some folks have asked before, like I have to do some leak code stuff, or I have to learn some algorithmic stuff. Drawing these things out is I find it super helpful to understand the flow of an algorithm. So like even think of like, for example, a linked list, it's like this piece, then it's this piece and this piece. So you draw the boxes, you point the arrow, and then you're like, when you remove it, it's like you get rid of that arrow, you pull out that box, and then you move the arrow to the next one. And just drawing it out, at least for me, and I know a lot of people are visual, it helps these things sink in. So yeah, definitely. And there's all kinds of tools, Excalibur, like Bekah said. Sometimes if taking notes, there's like mind mapping tools. There's other stuff like Obsidian or Rome. They're a little, I wouldn't say more advanced, but some of them it takes a little while to get used to, but I'm still learning Obsidian. But just connecting things, people learn in different ways. So like, I think over time you'll find out which tools help you long term. It's not really a one size fits all kind of thing. But yeah. But one tool that I would say is kind of handy is, and I know some folks haven't heard of it, but rubber ducking. So like literal, this is a rubber corgi, but yeah, okay, yeah, Shelly's got one. I used to have a duck one, but I lost it. But it doesn't have to be a physical thing, but just rubber ducking, for folks that might not be aware, that's just talking through a problem where you're talking to an inanimate object or yourself. I guess it's a way for you to talk to yourself feeling more comfortable. Um, just saying things out, or typing things out. Like another way I rubber duck is I'll just write a message to the Slack bot, direct message in Slack, and then I'll just start writing ideas out there. But either of those things I find helps a lot. I've seen it happen many times. Like I won't respond to somebody on Slack right away, and it's not because I don't want to help them. It could be because I'm doing something else, but a lot of times I'll give like a 10-minute buffer or whatever, because a lot of times when people type out their problem to you, they'll be like, you'll see a response like 10 minutes later. Oh, never mind, I figured it out. It's because of this, and it's just because they took the time to go ahead and write it out. So those are some other tools. I know we're kind of going all over the place here, but There's definitely tons of tools. There's also like, if you're doing web development, for example, so you have your web browser. The web browser comes with all kinds of developer tools. So you can inspect the document object model. You can see, the markup that's rendered. You can, most of the browsers, modern browsers support this. You can even, there's an accessibility tree. You can view the CSS. You can modify the CSS in there. There's a network tab. So like if things, say your page is crashing, or you make a call to some endpoint and it's not returning the data, you can look in the network tab and you'll be like, oh, weird, it gave a 404, it can't find the endpoint. So like these again are all just things like they're potentially small things, but you can just do those things first before you even go to somebody. Because if you went up to somebody and just said, yeah, I'm not getting the data back in my endpoint, and they're like, probably they'll say something like, oh, did you look at the network tab, or did you do this? So, these are definitely good things to do. I know sometimes folks aren't aware of some tools though. So that's okay, but as you discover tools, it's a great thing to share with other folks. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, lunch and learns. But yeah, just sharing your tooling with other people is super helpful too, because other people work differently, and I know I've worked with people and they're showing me something like, oh, I didn't know you could do that in the terminal, or I didn't know you could do this, and vice versa. So, I think a lot of times people assume that people know the things you're doing, and it's not necessarily true. So I find it, especially in a more remote world. I saw there was a comment about async communication. I think it's better to over communicate just because of that. So
Yeah, when I think too, coming out of boot camp, that was also another thing that was not really covered. We didn't do much debugging and console logging of anything. And that's probably my favorite skill because I
yeah,
use it so often, right? Like, how do you debug? Especially more complicated code bases, not just a project that has 5 or 10 files. How do you dig into it and really understand things? And it took me a while before I understood what the network tab did, how to utilize the network tab. But all of these things can be incredibly useful. So looking at whatever your specialty is in, or what path you're pursuing, what tools are being used to debug is going to be incredibly helpful as you're building your coding question toolbox.
yeah, no, it's great. I like that. The other thing is, you are going to get stuck at some point. It just happens. I remember a lot of this. I do a lot of these things now, but when I was younger, I did not. I used to just keep plugging away at a problem when now I know, I'm like, okay, something's not clicking right now. I'm getting up. I'm gonna go lie on the couch for a minute, read something, or maybe go for a walk. Depending on the time of day, it might be like, you know what, I'm done. I'm just grabbing a shower, going to bed. Um, and these are things you've probably heard before, but it's always good to just mention these, because I know a lot of people still don't do them. I'll say I'm generally pretty good at these things, but I still do fall in the trap sometimes where it's like, yeah, I know I'm cranking through this. I'm gonna do it. So, yeah. Exercise if you can, going for a walk, just basic, literally leaving the area where you work. So it doesn't matter if you don't have an office, if you work at the kitchen table at home or wherever, just literally go away from that area for a bit. Go outside if you can. Going outside is great, especially now that it's getting closer to summer. Get some vitamin D and then just like soak up some rays, and then uh, it's I still find it amazing how your brain is able to just start processing things when you just leave a problem. It's like this backup brain kicks in, and it's like, okay, well, while you're chilling, I'm just gonna sort this out for you. So
I just want to pause here for a second and see if there's any questions so far, or things that folks want to add about what their toolbox for navigating code challenges looks like. Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah, go
Justin.
ahead, Justin. Oh, you're on mute. Even though it says you're unmuted, we can't hear you.
Still cannot hear. He's okay. If you
Okay.
can figure it out,
If you
let us
get it
know.
working, or cool. But yeah, we've been talking a lot. So yeah, definitely go ahead, David.
I find when you're asking a question on an open source project, it's often really helpful to include things that you might not think about, like operating system where you're experiencing the problem, or the specific version of a package where you're experiencing the problem, or what relevant dependencies, like key dependencies or libraries, because these kinds of coordinates and details can help people zero in on it's part of reproducing the environment in which you're having the problem. And it's part of knowing sometimes a package or a library has a particular issue in a certain version, but it's been resolved in a different version. And so that becomes really important when somebody's trying to understand, are you running on the latest? Or, so that those kinds of details are often really helpful too, especially as somebody mentioned in the chat, when you are asking questions in an asynchronous medium, like posting a message in Slack across time zones, or GitHub issues.
Yep.
If you open an issue or comment on a pull request, that's always asynchronous and often across time zones. So the more of those details that you can front load your question with, the more context somebody will have to understand your problem and give you a relevant answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Jorn was saying as well, thank people for their work in open source, because a lot of times people just like to complain about open source. So yeah, I like to do that too. Just say, hey, thanks for the project. I'm stuck on this, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I think that goes a long way. Honestly, I don't think you can upset anybody with kindness. Maybe I can't think of any reason why it would upset somebody.
I think too, being respectful of other people's time goes right into that too, right? So, you don't demand time of people, right? We all have responsibilities that we're working on. And so don't just say, hey, like, you need to help me with this right now. That's not okay. Don't schedule a meeting with somebody and not show up. If there's an emergency, I think that's reasonable, but I feel like that happens very, very frequently to, open source contributors or people who aren't tied to your team. And that becomes really hard for people to navigate through, because everybody wants to be supportive. Many people want to be supportive, but it makes it harder to do that if you're not providing that sort of respect and gratitude.
Yeah, no, for sure. And speaking of people, you'd be surprised at how many people do want to help you. And that, and I'm not just talking about like the virtual coffee community. I'm talking about like even social media, like I'm not saying you literally have to say, hey, can't see dots, this is broken, fix it for me or help me. I mean, you could probably word it a little better, but I've put out questions there before, not directly at somebody, but like because a lot of the stuff I do is in open source, so I'll just be like, yeah, I'm working on this, stuck on this or something, and then like I remember one example clearly when I was still working at Dev2, we used Preact there, and I posted a issue that I was working on, or a PR, a pull request, and the creator of Preact actually answered in my pull request, oh, did try this, and I didn't go out and literally ask him for help, but he just, social media, you'd be surprised, like putting stuff out there. So don't be afraid to, it's just another tool in your toolbox. And you probably end up making some great connections with folks, another tangent there, but like if that's something you're trying to do, definitely, talking with people on social media can definitely help there. Yeah,
Yeah.
what else was I gonna say?
What does everybody here do when you're stuck? What are some things that you do to help you work through your coding challenges?
All right, I think we got audio.
I'll try again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. All
All
right.
right. I actually, now that y'all that I couldn't talk for a while, I got two things, and I'll do the simple one first about thanking people who have helped you. When we were raising our boys, something, it's really hard to explain to a 3-year-old to be really nice, or a 4-year-old to be really nice, and understand why, for them to understand why you should. And so we always kind of coached it in you get benefits from it. And somebody in here said it's a hack to get better answers. Well, we always taught them it's a good idea to thank people and be polite, because sometimes you get more. If you're really nice to the lady at the ice cream shop, she'll give you a bigger scoop and that kind of thing. And of course, that's not the real goal of being nice, but it works. And they have found throughout their lives now that when they're nice and respectful, they get compliments, they get more help, they get more assistance. So if you do the same in your career and you're asking for assistance in coding, you will get more assistance. You will get more people offering to help, and you'll build friendships. And that's really the goal of it, not to get more, but to build better relationships. So a bit back to what I was going to talk about, coding. I was in the Navy, electronics technician, and what we learned is that you never tackle a problem from where you see it. You split it in half, because if you start at the beginning of the problem, you may work your way through, go through every line of code until you discover it was the last line of code. Or if you start at the end, then you'll work your way backwards and discover it was the beginning of the code. And the old saying that it's always the last thing you check. Well, that's the way it's going to be. So the way we learn to troubleshoot is to split problems in half. You take out half of the entire project and see if it's broken anymore in the other half. And then once you know that, okay, this piece of code is safe, like you literally comment out components. Once you know that piece of code is safe, then you uncomment another section, you discover, oh, it's in the last half. And then once you've done that, then you keep breaking into half. And that way you reduce the scope of the problem you got to find by halves every time, instead of poking through every single line of code. So really do that. You've got one big file, well, comment out half of it and see if you still get that error. And if you don't, well, now it's somewhere in that other half, and just keep going through that way.
Yeah, no, that's great for sharing. As you were talking about that, I mentioned git bisect in the chat. So for folks who aren't aware of, there's a command in Git called bisect, and you can basically do what Justin's saying. You can say like, okay, the code's broken right now. Let me go back, through this half of the code, and like, okay, it's working there. So then, and it's actually related to binary search. So you just you keep cutting up the problem until you narrow it down. So it's definitely a good thing. And in terms of things not working, this is going to sound obvious to you, but when you're like, this was just working, why is it not working now? It's probably something you did. I know that sounds obvious, but I can't tell you how many times people have been stuck on something and it's something they did. And I have an example from last week. One of my friends was like, I'm stuck on something. They were like, okay, it's not building now, or it keeps crashing. And then I said, well, let's just undo the last thing you committed, because I didn't have any context to what they were doing. I just said just undo it, stash it, save it and bring it back after. They undid that commit, and then all of a sudden it was working, and a lot of these things sound obvious when I'm saying them or when people tell you, but I can't tell you how many times people still get the blinders on and they're like, no, it's something else. So I just wanted to mention that. Go ahead, David.
I think you got to the point I was going to make. Learn Git. I'll say that. Learn Git. Git is super helpful, because one of the things Git lets you do is easily what Nick said, take changes and stash them, or move them around, or jump forward and backward in time of all of the commits that you make. And that's super powerful when something isn't working, to move to a different point in the code's history and find when it was working and narrow down what might have changed. So that thing that Nick was just mentioning at the end of one of the habits I've tried to develop is before I start a new piece of work, I like to make sure that I have a little ritual. I like to make sure that I get the latest version of the code, and I like to try to build it, and I like to try to run all the tests before I start doing anything, because I like to have a baseline of knowing what works and what doesn't before I introduce any changes. And then as I start to work, if I have changes that I haven't committed yet and something isn't working, I'll use stash or git to roll back to the latest and compare and say, is this an issue just on my branch, or is this also an issue on main? And that can help me, figure out where I need to look. And then another thing is, no matter how experienced you are in a given technology or a given language, if you find yourself going over and over the same thing, ask for help. Really, reach out and ask for help. Just the other day, I was going over this piece of JavaScript code over and over and over and over and over, and it wasn't working. And I asked for help from my teammates, and a bunch of people jumped into a Zoom. Somebody found the problem right away. They saw something that I hadn't seen because I was looking at it and looking at it and looking at it, and I wasn't seeing what was actually there. I had spent so much time with that code that I was seeing what I believed was there, but I was no longer reading what was actually there. So sometimes fresh eyes can just help you see something that you're no longer seeing because you're busy thinking what it should be instead of what it is.
Yeah, no, definitely.
One of the things that we haven't mentioned yet is reading error messages. And that's another thing that I think I underestimated when I was learning how to code, right? Those error messages, they're not formatted nicely. Like, they look terrible, and sometimes you have to scroll a while to figure out like what is actually the error here, right? But they're pointing you in a direction. So if we're detectives, they are giving you a clue. Sometimes it's a really good clue, and you're like, yes, I have identified it is the butler in the library with the hammer, right? Other times it's like, it's the butler, but where is he, right? So those are clue references. I'm sorry if you didn't get them. The point is that sometimes it directs you where you need to go. Other times it gives you a general sense of what do you need to look at next? What do you need to Google? And sometimes you can just straight up put that error message into Google and it will take you where you need to go. I had an error yesterday. I was working on this project. I'm like, what? My code all looks good and it's running. Why am I getting this error? Well, it's because of my Loom extension, which had nothing to do with my project at all. But I Googled that error message and that's what came up in Stack Overflow. And if you disabled it, the error went away. Okay, so sometimes it's just, it's not anything that I could have expected. I could have sunk a ton of time into trying to figure out what that meant, but Googling it got me there in 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm glad you brought up the browser extension. There's it's a whole other topic, but creating issue templates in a repository. But one thing for web development is browser extensions can 100% break things. And I remember years ago, like in 2014, a well-known extension, the Adobe PDF extension, was breaking something on a site that we were working on. So it's another thing, like when you test things out, if it is broken, especially for web dev, is like try and test it without extensions enabled. You can Google it, but there's a way to load like your Chrome or Firefox without extensions. You don't have to literally remove them all. It's kind of rare, but it does happen. So that's definitely something good to check out. The other thing, when Becca was talking about error messages, is a lot of the code we're working in, it's your work code, so you have access to all the code, or you're consuming a lot of open source stuff. So literally all the code is available to you. So sometimes if I don't find anything, I'm gonna literally search the code for that particular error message, because then it can give you insights into, okay, well, why did that error get thrown? And it shows you why it's thrown, or like it shows you the chunk of code, at least how it leads to that error. So that can be helpful too. Debugging through the code, which we mentioned at the beginning, that's something that can be helpful too. A lot of times, anytime I start a new job, it's like you're given a task and it's like, okay, fix this bug, or look at this thing. And, I don't know the code base. So I literally, like, say the issue says, okay, well, on this screen with this text, like they give you a link to a web page or something, I'm going to literally copy some of the text in the place where they say you need to do something, and I'm going to search the code for it. And then that's how I typically kind of find my entry point into things. So like if you're doing front end, okay, let's look for where it says submit your claim. And then I find the code there. I see it's in this component. Okay, now where's that component being consumed? And then like you just kind of start doing your detective work, and a lot of these things sound obvious, but it's just good to just say them again, because as always, there's people I know where they just get stuck and they don't do some of these things. So I just like to explicitly say these things. Yeah, I was curious, if anybody else had some things they do when they start to navigate a new code base, because everybody's gonna encounter that situation. Like anytime you start a new job, it's gonna be like literal new code base. So I'm curious what other folks have done when they start to navigate a new code base. Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
I've done a lot of mentoring here on VC, and several times, I've done something in code, in Visual Studio Code, and somebody's like, "How'd you do that?" And two of the most common ones are find in all files, which a lot of people get. You can literally search the entire code base for a string, but sometimes that produces way too much information. So the best one is you can literally right click, and there's actually a keyboard shortcut on a particular folder, and do that global search, but just inside one folder of your whole code base. And that's the one where most people are like, I didn't know you could do that. Is really useful to get rid of the cruft that you don't really need to look for, but still search a huge swath of the code base to find that string or error or whatever or that you wanted to find.
Well, I'll tell you right now, I did not know you could do that. So I learned something right now. Yeah, I'm definitely going to be looking that up after. Yeah, and this comes back to my point where I was saying how, people use tools differently. They know more things about tools than others, than other folks. So that's why it's great to it's going to tie into like what we're going to wrap up with, but share what you know. It's just I like helping people, so I just enjoy doing it. But it's just a good thing to help out, whether it's a coworker or I know some folks are in the collab lab or just in the VC accountability. I can't say it. Accountability buddies, or whatever. You know what I mean. But we'll tie. I'm not going to say it now, but we'll tie into it in a few minutes. But it's just really good to share your knowledge. It's only going to help you. People are going to say like, oh yeah, man, Justin showed me this thing. Yeah, man, that's really cool. And thanks so much for that. And this ties into what Justin was saying about just kindness and helping. Nothing bad is going to come from that. If anything, they're going to be like, who knows down the road? Yeah, oh yeah, Justin's looking for a new role somewhere. Oh yeah, that guy's solid. Like he helped me out with this thing. And again, it's not, the point isn't to get things. I truly believe if you're kind to people, that karma or whatever you want to call it just plays out in your favor. So.
Yeah, I love that comment in the chat, Yearn. When it comes to a new code base, write down all issues you were facing when setting it up, improving the docs for setting up the project, or even automating some steps is also a good first contribution. And I would say 100%.
Yeah.
That was the first thing I did when I started my new job, I went through the blog posts and I ran as many of them as I could in order of the directions. And then I was able to identify where, okay, like this package needs installed if you don't already have it installed, or this is what you're saying is going to happen, but this is what I'm getting. So where is the conflict happening? You know, all of that stuff is good feedback to provide to other people.
I think Becca's about to be attacked by some small people. Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it's literally you only have one time to do this, because as soon as you go past that point of you got it installed, you're like, whatever, it's working on my machine now, and you're just gonna be like, you know. So it's one thing I like to do. I haven't always been able to do this, but like when you onboard somewhere, do what Jorn and Becca are saying, and then you know you kind of pass the baton to the next person. It just keeps improving the documentation and the onboarding process. So you're just helping out not only others but just the company in general. You know, so it's definitely a great thing to do, and documentation is just always super important. You know, if bad documentation is probably worse than no documentation. You know. Because you'll be like spending hours to be like, well, I followed the steps and it's still doing that thing. So, but yeah, we're getting close to time, and I don't know if it makes sense to bring it up now, Becca, but like all these things we've been talking about, you know, definitely it's all about being a good detective. We're talking about sharing what you learn and what you know, because it just benefits everybody. And I don't know if you want to talk about the June monthly,
Yeah,
Becca.
sure. So our monthly challenge for virtual coffee in June is month of feedback. And I think that this kind of goes right along with what our topic is today. You know, how can you provide feedback to someone who is asking questions? And I think that providing good feedback also helps you to help other people to grow in how they ask questions. So if somebody gives you a general question, think about what good feedback looks like in that scenario. You know, if it needs to be defined, say, hey, listen, this is a question that we can define further. So here are the resources that we have provided, which this will all go, everything that everybody's shared in here today will go on our YouTube channel, but it's a great way for people to start because again, like we're training people to be detectives, I think, who are first going through this. And it helps them to do that. But, you know, also as part of that, like there's things that you can do, like writing a blog post or making a video that allows those resources to grow and for people to be accessible to that kind of feedback.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the other thing, I'm just gonna drop it. I dropped it at the beginning, but I'm just gonna drop the coding questions guide that's on the virtual coffee site. And I'm dropping it not only because it's a good resource, but our whole project for the virtual coffee site is open source. So if there's things you'd like to add to it, I would definitely, you know, I don't know, I can't remember what our process is. If you create an issue to suggest adding a question, or if you just put up a pull request, you'd have to check the contributing guidelines. But yeah, that's somewhere where you can also help out others too, just by contributing to there.
Yeah, before we go for the day, thanks, Joe. Joe said he did an issue and then a PR, and there's also plenty of discussions up there too, so you can check the discussion board. Are there any questions that folks have or any last minute tips for navigating new code bases or asking questions? Going once, going twice.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like kind of lunchtime for me, so maybe that's what's all on my brain now. I'm just like, sandwich.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here and for listening and for sharing. It's really great to do a lunch and learn again. It's been nice to see everybody here and to be able to chat through this thing, which I think is, you know, one of the most underrated skills that we need to have as developers. So really excited about getting this up on the site, about having more resources available to our members and to people in tech at large, and for launching that monthly challenge in February. So thank you all so much for being here.
Take care, everybody.